Broken heart syndrome is not all in the head. The primary article that I looked at for this week was called Altered Limbic and Autonomic Processing Supports Brain-Heart Axis in Takotsubo Syndrome, begins by giving a brief background about Takotsubo syndrome, or TTS, which is described as having acute left ventricular dysfunction due to an excess of emotional or physical stress. Researchers believe that the syndrome may be caused by a dysfunction in the limbic system, which leads to an overactivation of the sympathetic nervous system, along with catecholamine release, as a response to an extremely high-stress trigger. The scientists that performed this research say that while there has been evidence to support the brain-heart relationship in TTS, the pathological mechanism is less understood. Furthermore, the researchers have previously demonstrated structural brain differences in the limbic network of TTS patients versus healthy controls. However, the goal of this specific study was to look at resting state functional connectivity patterns in TTS patients. The researchers defined resting state functional activity as occurring when two brain regions are simultaneously activated and communicating with each other. In order to look further into this, researchers examined the resting state functional connectivity in 15 women with TTS and 39 healthy control women using fMRIs. It's important to note that the patients with TTS experienced the excess stress or trauma about a year before the collection of the fMRIs. Next, statistical analyses were performed to identify activation or less activation of the subnetworks. They found reduced resting functional connectivity in both the parasympathetic and sympathetic associated networks, specifically in the amygdala, hippocampus, and insula. They also saw this in limbic regions, specifically the hippocampus, parahippocampal, and medial prefrontal regions. In addition, there was also reduced whole brain network and default mode network activation, or communication. To conclude, the study confirmed that there were differences in the networks of those experiencing TTS and those who were not. Most of the structures that were included in the networks are also known to be important for emotional processing. Furthermore, activation of the sympathetic nervous system is involved with cardiovascular disease, and the amygdala is known to have control over the response of the sympathetic nervous system to stress. Finally, an increase in amygdala activity is also related to cardiovascular disease, which leads scientists to believe that the amygdala is a core structure in controlling the relationship between stress and cardiovascular disease. Finally, seizures, intracranial bleeding, and migraines are twice as common in patients with TTS. Combined, these findings further strengthen the researchers' hypothesis, which is that the heart and brain are closely related in regards to TTS. The secondary article is from the New York Times and was called Broken Heart Syndrome is Not All in the Head. It begins by explaining how Takotsubo syndrome, commonly known as broken heart syndrome, is a medical condition that occurs or usually occurs after a period of extreme stress. They give the example of losing a loved one, and how it can be identified as a fast weakening and bulging of the heart. They explain that this happens until the heart resembles a narrow-necked Japanese octopus trap called Takotsubo, which is where the syndrome gets its name. The article also explains how the researchers believe that TTS is strongly related to the brain and how capable an individual's nervous system is to handle stress. The author explains the role of the sympathetic and parasympathetic systems in relation to stress and how the limbic system is involved in controlling the emotional response. The article provided enough background information so that readers would have a basis before learning more about the study, and the author also gave a brief but accurate description of the methods that were used for the study and explained the results clearly by saying that in the control subjects, the parts of the brain that were associated with emotions and the para and sympathetic nervous systems appeared to communicate as normal, whereas these areas in TTS patients has less communication or activation. Overall, I thought the article did a nice job of relaying accurate information from the primary article, and although it was relatively short, it included important background information on the brain, which was necessary for understanding this study.